Ralston Quad stared out the viewport of the diplomatic shuttle, the endless void of space staring back at him like the gaping mouth of a hungry beast. Well, this is just what I needed, he muttered. A trip to the galaxy's most secure bank, and all I've got to do is save us from being vaporized by the universe's worst accountants. Hey, at least they can't repossess your sense of humor, said Gwen, the team's tech whiz, who was busy flipping through her datapad as if the secret to life lay between its digital pages. Her attention was divided. That's what happened when you had a brain that ran faster than the ship's engine. The Galactic Bank Fortress floated in the distance, a massive construct that looked like someone had tried to build a castle and got distracted by a Rubik's Cube halfway through. It was a marvel of architecture if you were into the kind of architecture that said, "Trust us, we're definitely not hiding anything illegal here." It was also bristling with enough weapons to make you think twice about asking for a loan. What do you think the over-under is on us getting out of here without something trying to kill us? Gwen asked, her eyes still glued to her datapad. She wore her cynicism like a second skin, which was comforting in a place where honesty was as rare as a day without a cosmic catastrophe. I'd say 50-50, Quad replied, adjusting his diplomat's uniform, though I'm betting against us just to be safe. If I were a betting woman, which I am, I'd put my money on it being less of a negotiation and more of a hostage situation real quick, Gwen said. The shuttle docked with a shudder that rattled Quad's molars. The airlock cycled with a hiss, and the main doors slid open to reveal the gleaming interior of the bank fortress. Everything was either shiny and new, or shiny and wanting to kill you. The current betting odds were unclear. They were greeted by a tall, thin humanoid with skin the color of a corporate lawyer's heart. It wore a smile that could only have been programmed by someone who'd never actually seen a real one. "Welcome to the Galactic Bank Fortress, distinguished guests," the humanoid droned. "Please leave your weapons and hopes for peaceful exit here. I'm Quad," he said, offering a hand he didn't expect would be taken. It wasn't. "Here to see about that alliance." "Ah, yes," the humanoid replied, beckoning them forward. "Please follow me to the negotiation chamber, where you will be permitted to speak freely and without consequence." "That's government speak for 'we'll kill you last,'" Gwen whispered as they followed. The corridor was an endless stretch of clinically clean walls and floors, interrupted only by doors that promised either safety or a sudden drop into the cold vacuum of space. "You ever wonder how much of this place is real and how much is just here to make us feel uncomfortable?" Quad asked. "If I wanted to feel uncomfortable, I'd go visit my mother," Gwen replied. "This is just foreplay." They reached the negotiation chamber, a cavernous room that could comfortably house the egos of every diplomat in the galaxy and still have room for a couple of planets. In the center was a table that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of arrogance. Seated around it were representatives from species Quad could barely distinguish, their features blending into a tapestry of potential hostility. They all looked like they'd rather be anywhere but here. "Let's skip the pleasantries," Quad said, taking a seat and motioning for Gwen to do the same. "We both know why we're here." "Indeed," said a voice like sandpaper on steel. The speaker was a rotund figure, its face hidden beneath the hood. "The alliance is crucial for stabilizing the black holes in this sector, not to mention avoiding a cosmic implosion that would reduce all our negotiations to so much cosmic dust," Quad added. "Ah, the human penchant for stating the obvious," said another, its form flickering as if it wasn't entirely present. "Truly a gift to the galaxy." Before Quad could retort with something equally charming, the lights flickered and an alarm began to blare. "What now?" he asked, looking around as chaos erupted. The holograms at the head of the table blinked out, their absence a relief. The humanoid guide reappeared, the mechanical smile still fixed in place. "Attention, please. We're experiencing a security breach. Please remain calm while we attempt to contain the panic." "Panic," Gwen said, a smirk playing on her lips. "I thought this was all part of the experience." "What kind of breach?" Quad demanded, already running through the list of things that could go wrong in a place like this. The humanoid's eyes flickered, as if it were sifting through several files marked denial. "It appears we have uninvited guests. Shapeshifters, known as the Varnak, have infiltrated the facility." "Shapeshifters," Quad repeated, feeling the weight of the situation settle like a bad meal. "Fantastic. Just what we needed to spice things up. Why do they always pick the worst moments to show up?" Gwen mused, tapping something on her datapad. The humanoid continued. "The Varnak seek to steal the artifact that maintains the stability of the local black holes. We are currently about to do something stupid," Quad interrupted. "Implementing enhanced security measures," it corrected. "Please remain where you are. Stay put in a room full of potential enemies while shapeshifters run amok," Gwen said dryly. "Sounds like a plan. Well, what's the worst that could happen?" Quad asked, scanning the room for exits, allies, and potential scapegoats. We could die horribly, Gwen replied, but at least we'd have the satisfaction of knowing we died doing something monumentally stupid. The alarm continued to blare, the kind of sound that made you wish you were deaf. Quad leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. So here we are, he said, stuck between a rock and a hard vacuum, and it's only a matter of time before one of those rocks decides to shift into something more hostile, Gwen added. A sudden crackle over the intercom interrupted their musings. To all personnel, we're enacting Code Black. Repeat, Code Black. Secure all artifacts and prepare for evacuation. Code Black, Quad repeated, raising an eyebrow. Sounds ominous. Let's hope it's not code for we're all screwed, Gwen said as she began tapping furiously on her datapad. The room's occupants were getting restless, exchanging glances and whispers, each more concerned than the last. So what's the plan, boss? Gwen asked, looking up from her screen. Plan, Quad said, as if the word itself were a foreign concept. We improvise. Stick close, keep your eyes open for anyone who looks too much like us, and try not to die. Solid advice, Gwen said, if a bit vague on the details. I'll make it up as I go along, Quad assured her. Like every other day of my life, the lights flickered again, plunging the room into a darkness that felt thicker than space itself. When they came back on, Quad was sure someone had moved. Or maybe it was just his imagination running wild, the kind of wild that came with impending doom. Time to change the odds, he said, standing up and looking around the table at the uneasy representatives. Anyone care to join me in not dying today? A few nodded, others just looked like they wished they could. Guess that's as good as we're gonna get, Gwen said, rising beside him. Let's give the Varnak a run for their money, Quad said, heading for the door with as much confidence as he could muster. Or at least make them work for it. As they stepped into the corridor, the alarm droned on, and the bank fortress felt more like a tomb. Somewhere out there, the Varnak were hunting, and it was anyone's guess who they'd find first. All in a day's work, Quad thought grimly, the kind of work that made you question your career choices, but just another Tuesday in the galaxy. Ralston Quad stalked down the corridor of the Galactic Bank Fortress with Gwen at his side, both acutely aware that they were trapped in a financial death trap with a side of infiltration. The kind of place where a currency exchange could end with a plasma bolt to the brain. You know, Gwen started, her fingers a blur over her datapad, for a place that's supposed to be the Fort Knox of the galaxy. They sure picked a hell of a day to have a security breach. Everyone has an off day, Quad replied, scanning the sterile hallways for signs of trouble, or salvation, whichever came first. Even Fort Knox is probably due for a robbery, or at least a messy audit. They reached a junction where a blast door stood half open, a sign that someone had left in a hurry, or worse, someone had opened it. Given the circumstances, neither seemed reassuring. Think the lizards already got in? Gwen asked, tapping at her screen. Or did some poor bastard just forget his lunch? Not the time to dwell on the mysteries of abandoned sandwiches, Quad said, spying movement in the shadows. We've got bigger lizards to fry. A figure appeared, angular and human in outline, but with a chameleon quality around the edges. Nessa Trill, Quad's assistant, emerged with the practiced stealth of someone who had mastered the art of avoiding small talk at office parties. Boss, she said, nodding with a familiarity that skirted insubordination. Glad you're still breathing. Figured I might run into you here, or at least stumble over your corpse. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Nessa. Got anything useful? Quad asked, his eyes darting to the datapad clutched in her hands like it held the answers to the universe, or at least today's survival. Maybe, Nessa replied. I've picked up some chatter. Seems the Varnak are planning on replacing key personnel with their own shapeshifted agents. Of course they are, Gwen muttered. If I had a credit for every time someone tried to replace me with someone else, I'd own this fortress. Quad let out a dry chuckle. A bold strategy. What's the play? Nessa's grin was as sharp as a photon blade. Well, they're good at mimicking, but we've got an edge they can't replicate. Charm, wit, smelling like yesterday's laundry, Quad asked, tapping his fingers against the cool metal wall. Human unpredictability, Nessa said with a shrug. We're going to use it to our advantage. The Varnak adapt quickly, but they can't deal with anything that's truly off-script, so we hit them with some good old-fashioned chaos, Gwen suggested, a mischievous glint in her eye. Exactly, Nessa confirmed. We create a situation so bizarre that their instincts go haywire. Sounds like a plan I'd come up with, Quad said, right before someone calls it reckless and stupid. Reckless and stupid is just innovation with worse PR, Gwen added. Quad nodded. All right, we'll need to split up. Cause enough disruption to keep them guessing and on their toes. Claws, Gwen, try to scramble their sensors. Make them see ghosts. Nessa spread some misinformation. Make them chase their tails. Gwen saluted with a casual flick of her datapad. On it. Let's make this place a paranormal hotbed. Nessa grinned, already disappearing into the shadows like a rumor. I'll have them hunting phantoms in no time. And just like that, they were off, each taking a different path through the labyrinthine corridors. Quad's sense of self-preservation had long since evolved into a functional paranoia, which was damned handy in a fortress teeming with shape-shifting aliens. He pressed forward, ready for anything or nothing, which was often more dangerous. The lighting flickered again, only this time it seemed deliberate. Quad paused, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm, a relic from a more civilized age that, like most relics, would probably break at the first sign of trouble. A voice crackled over the intercom. "All personnel, please be advised. There is a mandatory meeting in the main atrium. Attendance is compulsory," Quad grimaced. He'd been avoiding meetings his entire career, and he wasn't about to break that streak now just because some alien shapeshifters were in attendance. "This is a terrible time for a corporate retreat," he muttered, moving with purpose toward the atrium, the place most likely to offer answers, or more questions, which he had in abundance. When he arrived, the atrium was a chaotic mess of representatives and staff, each more bewildered than the last. It was like a zoo where someone had forgotten to lock the cages. "Attention," Quad hollered, his voice cutting through the din like a knife through bureaucracy. "We've got a situation. Shapeshifters in the facility. Keep an eye out for anyone acting unusually, more so than usual, I mean." His announcement was met with a chorus of murmurs, some fearful, others skeptical. "Easy for you to say," quipped a voice from the back. "How can we trust you're not one of them?" Quad sighed. "If I were one of them, I'd be doing paperwork, not talking to you lot. Use your heads, people." A skeptical silence followed. "Keep it together," Quad continued. "And remember, if it feels wrong, it probably is." "Great pep talk," Gwen said, sidling up beside him. "I almost believed you. Thanks for the vote of confidence," Quad replied, eyeing the crowd for potential threats. "Managed to loop their sensors back on themselves. They're probably seeing double by now. Perfect. That should keep them busy." "What's next?" Gwen asked. "Besides praying, we keep moving," Quad said. "Keep them guessing. Human unpredictability, remember, right?" Gwen sighed. "Let's hope they're not quicker learners than we are." Together, they wove through the crowd, heading toward the bank's central control room, a place that promised answers, or at least more confusion. The corridors felt alive, as if every shiny surface hid 1,000 eyes, each one watching their every move. It was enough to make a person nostalgic for the days when enemies stayed in one shape. "Feels like one of those nightmares where you show up to work naked," Gwen remarked as they walked. "Except the stakes are slightly higher. Speak for yourself," Quad replied. "I'm more worried about getting stabbed by someone who thinks I'm yesterday's enemy." The control room door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a space that was more computers than walls. Screens lined every surface, each one displaying data streams that could drive a person mad if they stared too long. "Well, if we're not careful, we could accidentally hack into someone's vacation photos," Gwen said, already tapping away at the nearest terminal. "Just what I need," Quad said, "to be haunted by pictures of alien beaches." He took a seat at another console, his fingers dancing over the controls with the grace of a concert pianist on a caffeine bender. "All right, let's see what we're dealing with," he muttered, bringing up a schematic of the bank fortress. "If the Varnak are here for the artifact, they'll be heading to the vault. Convenient that we're headed in the same direction," Gwen said, her eyes never leaving her screen. "I'll see if I can lock them out. At least make them take the scenic route." "Good idea." "We'll need all the time we can get." As Gwen worked her magic, Quad considered their options. They needed to get to the vault before the Varnak, but without drawing too much attention. A tricky balance, but then he'd always been good at walking tightropes. "Got it," Gwen said suddenly. "Rerouted them through Sector 7. That's the long way around. Good. Let's move before they figure it out." They left the control room, heading deeper into the fortress, where the air was thick with the promise of danger. The corridors narrowed, the walls closing in like the maw of some mechanical beast. "This place gives me the creeps," Gwen said, her voice a whisper in the oppressive silence. "All it needs is a few skeletons, and it'd be perfect for a horror vid." Quad chuckled, though the sound was devoid of humor. "Just keep your eyes peeled. If someone looks like they're going to a Halloween party, shoot first, ask questions later." They reached the vault level, a place that felt more secure than Fort Knox had any right to be. The door to the vault was a monstrous thing, all steel and electronic locks, a testament to the bank's paranoia. "Think we're in time?" Gwen asked, casting a wary glance at the door. "We'd better be," Quad said, "because if not, we're out of options." The door opened with a reluctance that was almost palpable, revealing a room filled with more wealth than sense. But Quad's eyes were drawn to the centerpiece, a pedestal holding an artifact that seemed too small to be so important. "There it is," Gwen said, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "The thing they're willing to kill for. Let's hope we're willing to kill to protect it," Quad replied. They stepped into the vault, the door closing behind them with a finality that felt like a judge's gavel. Outside, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, the Varnak closing in. "Well," Gwen said, "looks like it's showtime." Quad nodded, his hand resting on his sidearm, ready for whatever came next. "Indeed. Let's give them a performance they'll never forget. As the door shuddered under the force of alien hands, Quad prepared for the confrontation, his mind sharp and focused. The Varnak were coming, and it was time to show them just how unpredictable humans could be. Anyone got a plan B? Nessa's voice crackled over the comms, sounding more annoyed than worried, which was reassuring, sort of. At least she wasn't screaming yet. Screaming was usually a bad sign. Quad glanced at Gwen, who shrugged with the casual air of someone who'd misplaced their keys, not someone trapped in a vault with aliens pounding on the door. I thought Plan B was run like hell. Funny, Quad said, checking his sidearm, which was more of a comfort object than a weapon. I don't remember a Plan A. Oh, there was a Plan A, Gwen interjected, still fiddling with the console like it was a particularly stubborn puzzle box. It just involved less imminent death. I don't know if that's an improvement or not, Quad muttered. The door shuddered again, accompanied by the unnerving screech of alien metal against metal. The Varnak were persistent, he'd give them that. Persistent like a hangover after cheap Martian whiskey. Nessa's voice cut in again, sounding a bit more frantic. You two better have something up your sleeves. I'm running out of shadows to hide in. We're working on it, Gwen replied. Keep them distracted. Nessa's laugh was more of a bark. Want me to juggle while I'm at it? Whatever works, Quad said. Just make sure they don't find out we're holed up in a glorified piggy bank, got it. I'll just tell them I'm filming a documentary on bad decisions. Quad couldn't help but grin as he turned back to the task at hand. All right, Gwen, time to make magic happen magic. Gwen raised an eyebrow. You think I'm some kind of tech wizard? No, but I pay you well enough to pretend. Gwen rolled her eyes, fingers dancing over the datapad. Okay, I can reroute the power supply. Might buy us some time before they breach the door. I like the word might, Quad said. It's noncommittal, like me in a relationship. The lights flickered briefly, then held steady as Gwen worked her magic, or something close to it. The pounding on the door faltered for a moment, and Quad could almost imagine the Varnak scratching their heads or whatever they had for heads. He'd never been close enough to check. What about the artifact? Gwen asked, nodding toward the pedestal. It looked suspiciously underwhelming, like something a kid might win in a school science fair. Any bright ideas? Quad shrugged. We can't let the Varnak have it, that's for sure. I hear they redecorate with the blood of their enemies. They'd probably say it brings out the color of the drapes, Gwen added. Well, I'm more of a minimalist, Quad said. Less blood, more leaving me the hell alone. The pounding resumed, more forceful this time. It seemed the Varnak had found their second wind or second set of fists. Quad's mind raced, trying to piece together a plan that didn't involve becoming a smear on the vault walls. There's got to be something in here we can use, Gwen mused, scanning the room like a tourist looking for souvenirs. Explosives, a really angry house cat, a force field generator would do nicely, Quad suggested, though he knew it was wishful thinking. Or maybe a teleport pad. Gwen tapped away at her datapad, more out of habit than expectation. If I can overclock the system, it might give us a temporary shield. It'll probably fry the circuits, though. Sounds great, Quad said. I love living dangerously. Gwen shot him a withering look. You must be a blast at parties, only the ones with open bars. With a few deft taps, Gwen initiated the sequence. The air hummed with a low vibration, and a shimmering barrier flickered to life in front of the vault's entrance. It wasn't much, more like a digital curtain than a wall, but it was better than nothing. Think it'll hold? Quad asked, eyeing the barrier skeptically. About as well as a paper umbrella in a meteor storm, Gwen replied. But hey, it's something. Nessa's voice blared through the comms again, punctuated by the unmistakable sound of laser fire. You two having fun in there? Because it's a real party out here, just setting up the decorations, Gwen replied. How's it looking? They've got the place surrounded, Nessa said. Like a pack of wolves around a buffet. Quad glanced at the artifact again, the supposed reason for all this chaos. If they want this so bad, maybe we should just hand it over. See if it's worth all the trouble. Not an option, Gwen said firmly. This thing's got enough power to make blowing up a star look like a fireworks show, right? So, terrible plan, just keep them busy, Nessa, Gwen added. We'll figure something out. I'm doing my best, Nessa replied. But I can't promise they won't start shooting each other out of sheer boredom. Quad took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing mind. All right, we need a distraction. Something big, something flashy like a magic show, Gwen suggested, not missing a beat. More like a disappearing act, Quad said. I'll head to the opposite end of the vault, create some noise. Maybe draw them away and leave me here with this alien knickknack, Gwen asked, arching an eyebrow. You'll manage, Quad said with a grin. Besides, if anyone can charm their way out of a situation, it's you. Flattery will get you everywhere, Gwen said dryly. Fine, just don't get yourself killed. Wouldn't dream of it, Quad replied, heading toward the far end of the vault. As he moved, Quad's mind spun with possibilities. He needed something that would make the Varnak think twice about their pursuit, something that screamed danger louder than a toddler in a candy store. He surveyed the shelves, eyes landing on a row of volatile-looking canisters. Well, hello, fireworks, he muttered, grabbing a handful and arranging them in a precarious pile. If he was going to make noise, he might as well do it with style. Gwen, be ready to seal the room when I give the signal, he said into the comms, hoping his voice didn't betray the nerves tightening his chest. Got it, she replied. Be careful, Quad grinned, though there was no one to see it. Where's the fun in that? With a final check to make sure the canisters were primed, he took a deep breath and made his way back to the center of the vault. He could feel the adrenaline thrumming through his veins, a heady mix of fear and excitement. All right, Varnak, he muttered. Let's see how you handle a bit of human ingenuity. With a quick flick of his wrist, he set off the canisters. The resulting explosion rocked the vault, sending shockwaves reverberating through the walls. It was a beautiful cacophony, like a symphony composed entirely of chaos and destruction. Now he shouted into the comms. Gwen didn't need to be told twice. The digital barrier flared to life again, reinforced by every ounce of power she could drain from the bank systems. Outside, the pounding on the door ceased, replaced by a stunned silence that was almost comical. Nice fireworks, Nessa quipped over the comms. Think you can do that again? Let's not push our luck, Quad replied, still catching his breath. How are things looking on your end? I've managed to slip past their perimeter, Nessa said, but they are regrouping. Won't take them long to figure out we're still in here. Then we'd better make the most of it, Gwen said. I've rerouted the power, but it won't hold them forever. Quad nodded, though she couldn't see it. All right. Let's make our move. Got any bright ideas? Nessa asked, her tone a mix of sarcasm and genuine curiosity. Actually, yes, Quad said, surprising even himself. We're going to give them what they want. Gwen shot him a sharp look. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious, Quad said, just not in the way they're expecting. As the Varnak regrouped outside, Quad began setting up their little show. It was a gamble like everything in his life, but he'd always been one to bet on the long shot. Besides, if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that nothing threw an enemy off balance like the unexpected. The plan was simple, if not exactly foolproof. They'd create a diversion, make it look like they'd left the vault through some hidden exit, and slip out through the confusion. It was risky, but then again, so was everything in this line of work. Gwen, you ready? He asked, fingers crossed metaphorically if not literally. Ready as I'll ever be, she replied, though her voice was tight with anticipation. Nessa, you good to go? Just say the word, Nessa replied. I'll keep them guessing. Quad took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a shoddy space blanket. All right, let's do this. With a flourish that would have made a stage magician proud, he triggered the decoys. Holographic projections flickered to life, creating the illusion of movement, people, shapes, shadows, everything the Varnak needed to believe they'd been outmaneuvered. The doors to the vault slid open, and for a moment Quad held his breath, waiting for the inevitable onslaught, but it never came. Instead, the Varnak hesitated, their confusion palpable even through the reinforced walls. Now, Nessa, he barked. Nessa sprang into action, her movements a blur as she darted through the labyrinth of corridors, using every trick in the book to mislead and misdirect their enemies. It was like watching a master martial artist in a dance of death, except the only thing dying was the Varnak's confidence. Gwen quickly followed suit, her fingers a blur on the datapad as she orchestrated their escape. The system hummed with energy, powering the holograms to create the illusion of their retreat. All right, everyone, Quad said, his voice tinged with a grim satisfaction. Let's get the hell out of here. Together, they slipped through the turmoil, the artifact secure in its place, and their hearts pounding with the thrill of the chase. It was a dangerous game, and one they might not win, but for now they were alive, and in this line of work, that was enough. Quad's breath was still coming in sharp gasps as they slipped into yet another windowless corridor, each step echoing like a death knell. A quick glance over his shoulder confirmed the Varnak were still buying their act, for now at least. Hell of a magic trick, Quad, Gwen muttered, the faintest hint of admiration in her voice. Hope you've got a disappearing act up your sleeve next. Maybe, he grinned, but I left my top hat on the shuttle. As they rounded a corner, Quad couldn't shake the feeling that things were bound to get worse. They always did, like the universe had personal beef with him. And now, with the Varnak on their tail, it was only a matter of time before someone tripped over a proverbial rug and sent the whole charade crumbling down. Nessa's voice crackled through the comms, her tone exuding both urgency and the kind of excitement only a born troublemaker could muster. Got some juicy intel for you, boys and girls. Our scaly friends aren't acting solo. Turns out they've got backing. And it ain't just your garden variety bad guys. Great, Quad sighed, running a hand through his hair. And here I thought this was just a simple run for your life kind of day. Who's pulling their strings? Gwen asked, her eyes narrowing as she processed the implications. None other than the Crimson Syndicate, Nessa replied. You know, the ones who make piracy look like a charitable organization. The Crimson Syndicate. Quad let out a low whistle. Now there's a name that sends shivers down your spine. Or arse cracks, depending on your angle. Think they're looking to destabilize the region. Gwen pondered. tapping the datapad with a focus that suggested she might just reach through and throttle the conspirators on the other end. Wouldn't surprise me, Quad said. They've got a history of turning galactic stability into a smoldering pit of bad decisions. Let's just hope we're not the latest addition to their bad decisions scrapbook. Is it a glossy or matte finish? Quad quipped, his dark humor only slightly masking his unease. Either way, it ain't our color. Gwen's smirk was thin but present. Nessa chimed back in. The Varnak are onto something. They're sniffing around like a bloodhound on a meat truck. We need another plan and fast, right? Quad nodded, the gears in his brain creaking into motion. Let's add a bit more chaos to this stew. If they love a good mystery, let's give them a hoojunit. Gwen raised an eyebrow. Is that a plan or just a catchy tagline? A bit of both, Quad grinned, the kind of grin that usually preceded disaster or victory depending on the day. We'll split up, keep them guessing. Don't let them know who's holding the artifact. You're volunteering to be the rabbit in the spotlight, Gwen asked, her eyes glinting with a challenge. I do have the face for it, Quad replied, but I was thinking more of a relay race. Pass the parcel with a deadly twist. Consider me intrigued, Nessa said, her voice laced with anticipation. Let's make it happen. They moved through the fortress like shadows, each step calculated, every breath measured. The corridors twisted like a labyrinth designed by a sadistic architect with a penchant for ugly surprises. Somewhere behind them, the Varnak were regrouping, likely with the kind of resolve that only fanatics and accountants could muster. Quad paused at an intersection, listening intently. You hear that? Gwen nodded, tapping the datapad thoughtfully. Sounds like they're setting up shop. Must be planning something big like what? A bake sale. Quad's sarcasm was a thin veneer over genuine concern, more like a stakeout. They're waiting for us to make a move, Gwen replied. Then let's not disappoint them, Quad said, his mind racing. Nessa, how's your end? I'm in position. Nessa's voice was steady, unshaken by the chaos surrounding them, ready to create a mess they won't soon forget. Perfect, Quad said. Let's give them a show they'll talk about for years. With deft fingers, Gwen manipulated the controls, setting up a series of phantom signals and false trails. It was like watching a master pianist play a symphony of deception, each note a lie, each pause a trap. They're going to think they've cornered us, Gwen said, a wicked gleam in her eyes. And when they do, we'll be long gone, Quad finished, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. The next few minutes were a blur of orchestrated chaos. Nessa sent out a surge of conflicting data bursts, flooding the Varnak's comms with misleading pings and phantom signatures. Gwen's holograms added to the confusion, conjuring spectral figures that flitted through the fortress like ghosts with a grudge. Meanwhile, Quad played the part of the harried prey, darting down corridors and doubling back, always staying one step ahead of the Varnak's clumsy pursuit. He could almost feel the hot breath of their frustration on his neck, a heady, intoxicating rush. Keep them on their toes, Quad, Nessa's voice urged through the comms. I'm almost in position. Playing tag with aliens was never on my bucket list, Quad muttered, ducking into a side passage. But I have to admit it's got a certain thrill. Just be careful they don't decide to play rough, Gwen warned, her eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of pursuit. Don't worry, I've got a gift for them if they get too close, Quad replied, patting the sidearm at his hip. The next junction was a bottleneck, a point where things could easily go sideways if the Varnak decided to press their advantage. But Quad had no intention of being boxed in. He paused, listening to the distant echoes of pursuit growing louder. Time to lead them on a merry chase, he murmured, glancing back at Gwen. You ready? Born ready, she replied, flashing him a confident smile. Quad took a deep breath and sprinted down the corridor, the sound of his footfalls echoing off the walls. He could almost feel the Varnak closing in, their relentless pursuit like a nightmare that refused to wake up. As he neared the designated rendezvous point, Quad caught sight of Nessa's signal, a small, discreet flash of light in the darkness. He veered toward it, his heart pounding with the thrill of the chase. Nessa, you there? He whispered into the comms. Right here, she replied, her voice a balm to his frayed nerves. The Varnak are about to get the surprise of their lives. Good, Quad said, allowing himself a grim smile. Let's make sure they remember it. Nessa had set up a series of traps and distractions, a web of chaos designed to ensnare the unwary. As Quad slid into position, he could see the first of the Varnak entering the trap, their expressions a mix of determination and confusion. Here goes nothing, Quad muttered, triggering the first trap. The resulting explosion was a symphony of destruction, a cacophony of sound and fury that echoed through the corridors like a wrathful ghost. Quad watched with satisfaction as the Varnak staggered, their formation shattered by the sudden assault. Nice work, Gwen's voice crackled through the comms. Now let's get out of here before they decide to return the favor. Quad nodded, already moving. Nessa, you good? I'm right behind you, she replied, her voice steady and calm amidst the chaos. They slipped away, the fortress behind them a cauldron of confusion and shattered expectations. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless, and Quad couldn't help but savor the taste. As they made their escape, Quad allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The Crimson Syndicate's involvement changed everything, adding a layer of complexity that promised to make their lives even more interesting and dangerous. But for now, they were alive, and that was enough. Quad turned his thoughts to the future, to the challenges that lay ahead, and found himself smiling in spite of it all. "Here's to living another day," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the comms. "Here's to making it count," Nessa replied, her words a promise of further adventures to come. And as they slipped into the shadows of the unknown, Quad couldn't help but feel a strange sense of optimism, cynical, irreverent, and utterly human. Ralston Quad was crouched in a dank, unforgiving alcove that smelled vaguely of desperation and burnt wires. The Galactic Bank Fortress was a maze of corridors designed to thwart intruders, but right now it felt more like the universe's most elaborate trap, and Quad was the mouse wondering how he'd wound up in a cheeseless void with a horde of cat-like alien maniacs on his tail. He peeked around the corner, catching a glimpse of scaly forms slithering with the kind of malevolent intent that usually preceded something sharp and pointy getting embedded in vital organs. The Varnak were relentless and about as subtle as a rock to the face. Quad tapped his comms, his voice deliberately light. "Nessa, remind me again why we're doing this," Nessa's voice crackled back, a mix of static and sarcasm. "Oh, you know the usual: fame, glory, and a paycheck that wouldn't even cover a week's worth of ramen, right?" Quad muttered, rolling his eyes. "Because who doesn't want to die penniless and hungry in the ass end of the galaxy?" Gwen, perched beside him with her datapad, shot him a wry smile. "At least it'll be a memorable obituary." Ralston Quad died heroically in a futile attempt to outsmart lizard people backed by a criminal syndicate. "Catchy," Quad grunted, adjusting his grip on the sidearm that felt increasingly like a security blanket. "We should get that printed." Their banter was a thin veneer over the grim reality. They were cornered, with only a few slim chances slithering away like snakes between their fingers. The Varnak, equipped with tech that made Quad's best gadgets look like stone tools, were advancing with the kind of confidence that only bloodthirsty zealots and used car salesmen could muster. "We need a miracle," Gwen said, her voice laced with a determination that suggested she might just invent one if given enough time and stubbornness. "Or a really good distraction," Quad replied, peering down the corridor where shadows played like ghosts in a haunted house. "Any chance you've got a magic trick up your sleeve?" Gwen shrugged, tapping furiously at her datapad. "Working on it. But if you're expecting me to pull a rabbit out of my hat, you're going to be sorely disappointed." "Best I can do is maybe a holographic rabbit." "Close enough," Quad said, a grin tugging at the corners of his lips despite the doom hanging over their heads. "Anything to keep them guessing." Nessa's voice crackled through again as she reported in from her position. "The Varnak are getting cocky. They're closing the net, thinking they've got us cornered." "Let them think it," Quad said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "Their arrogance might just be our ticket out." Gwen glanced at him, skepticism writ large on her face. "And if it's not, then we die in a blaze of glory," Quad replied, shrugging. "Could be worse. Could die of boredom or taxes. Death by paperwork," Gwen snorted. "Now there's a nightmare." Quad's fingers danced over his gear, checking and rechecking as if somehow the ritual could grant him the edge he needed. "Let's give them a reason to sweat," he said, his voice low and determined. "We split up, double back, and hit them where it hurts. Keep them chasing ghosts while we find a way out of this coffin, playing to our strengths then," Gwen asked, raising an eyebrow. "Exactly," Quad said, flashing a grin that was more bravado than belief. "When in doubt, sow chaos." Gwen's fingers flew over her datapad, setting up a series of holographic decoys. If the Varnak wanted a fight, they'd have plenty of targets to choose from. The first flicker of light danced in the corridor, and Quad watched as a spectral figure appeared, a ghostly mirror of himself. "You know, I always said I needed to be in two places at once. Now's your chance," Gwen said, her voice a mix of encouragement and exasperation. "Just don't get too attached to your doppelganger." Quad nodded, the weight of their predicament settling on his shoulders like an unwanted guest. But there was no time for self-pity or regret, only action. "Nessa, you ready to make some noise?" "Locked and loaded," came Nessa's reply, her voice a blend of mischief and resolve. "Good," Quad said, the plan forming like a storm cloud ready to burst. "Let's see how they handle a three-ring circus." With the flick of a switch, Gwen unleashed the holograms, each one darting away with a flicker of light and a whisper of movement. Quad watched as the Varnak reacted, their confusion palpable even at a distance. "Look at them scramble," Gwen murmured, satisfaction coloring her words, "like cats with a laser pointer. Let's hope they chase it long enough for us to get clear," Quad muttered, eyes narrowed as he scanned the passageways for an opening. And then it was time to move, slipping from shadow to shadow, heart pounding with the thrill of the impossible. The fortress was a labyrinth of steel and secrets, but Quad knew it better than most, a familiarity born of necessity and more than a few close calls. The Varnak were focused on the holograms, their attention splintered as they tried to corral the phantoms. It was a small advantage, but enough to give Quad and Gwen a fighting chance. This way, Quad whispered, leading her through a narrow corridor that felt more like a gullet than a hallway. There's an access shaft up ahead. We can use it to bypass their lines. I'll take your word for it, Gwen replied, her tone a mix of trust and trepidation. But if we end up in the trash compactor, I'm holding you personally responsible, noted, Quad said, a small chuckle escaping despite the tension. Just keep an eye out for any overconfident reptiles. They reached the shaft, a metal maw that gaped open with the promise of escape. Quad reached for the manual lever, muscles straining as he forced it open with a groan of protest from the mechanisms. Ladies first, he said, gesturing with mock gallantry. Such a gentleman, Gwen replied, ducking inside with a grace that belied the chaos surrounding them. Quad followed the shaft a claustrophobic tunnel that wound deeper into the fortress. It was dark, damp, and decidedly inhospitable, a perfect hiding place for those desperate enough to risk it. Any regrets? Gwen asked, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. Only that I didn't bring a flashlight, Quad replied, his tone light but edged with an undercurrent of sincerity. Other than that, nah. Wouldn't miss this for the universe. They emerged in a supply room, the stark contrast to the chaos of the corridors a brief but welcome reprieve. Quad leaned against the wall, catching his breath while Gwen checked the datapad for signs of pursuit. They're still playing with the holograms, she said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. We've bought ourselves some time. Time's good, Quad agreed. But we're going to need more than that to get out of this mess. Any brilliant ideas? Gwen asked, eyebrow arched in challenge. Quad paused, considering their options. The fortress was like a fortress, no surprise there, and escape routes were scarce. But if there was one thing Quad prided himself on, it was his ability to find a way out of a no-win scenario. We need a distraction, he said slowly, the gears in his mind turning with a familiar, satisfying click. Something big enough to draw every Varnak in the place. And how do you propose we do that? Gwen asked, her skepticism palpable. Quad grinned, a flash of mischief lighting his features. We blow something up. Gwen's eyes widened, a mix of horror and admiration dancing in her gaze. You're serious as a heart attack, Quad replied, already moving to gather the materials they'd need. There's a power conduit running through the lower levels. If we can overload it, you'll take out a chunk of the fortress, she finished, her voice tinged with awe. You're insane, only mildly, Quad said with a shrug. But it's our best shot. We hit it, create the biggest light show this side of the galaxy. The Varnak won't know what hit them, or us, Gwen pointed out. Details, Quad said with a dismissive wave. If we're lucky, we'll be long gone before the fireworks start. Gwen shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips despite the madness of it all. All right then, let's go play with fire. They moved quickly, avoiding patrols and slipping through empty corridors with the kind of silent efficiency that only desperation could produce. Quad's mind was a whirl of calculations and contingencies, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the fortress and the chance to end this nightmare. At the power junction, Quad worked quickly, fingers dancing over wires and circuits with a familiarity that was both comforting and terrifying. It was a risky plan, one that could easily backfire, but it was their only hope. Almost there, he muttered, sweat beading on his brow as he made the final connections. Gwen stood watch, her attention focused on the corridor and the threat of discovery. You sure about this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. No, Quad admitted, a grin splitting his face. But that's never stopped me before. With a final twist, the circuit was complete, and the power began to surge, a low hum rising to a crescendo that set Quad's teeth on edge. Time to go, he said, urgency in his voice as the machinery around them began to convulse with energy. They sprinted away, the rumble of impending destruction at their heels. The corridor was a blur, the fortress alive with the sounds of chaos and confusion as the Varnak scrambled to respond. And then the explosion hit, a roar of sound and fury that shook the very foundations of the fortress. Quad felt the shockwave ripple through the air, a visceral reminder of the power they'd unleashed. Now that's a distraction, Gwen said breathlessly as they dove for cover, the world around them lit by the glow of destruction. Let's hope it's enough, Quad replied, his voice barely audible over the din. Because I'm fresh out of miracles. They lay in the shadows, the chaos of the Varnak's response echoing around them. But in the midst of the noise and confusion, Quad felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they'd bought themselves a fighting chance. Here's to making it count, Gwen murmured, the promise of further adventure in her words. Quad nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. It was a long shot, a gamble against impossible odds, but if there was one thing he knew, it was that sometimes the greatest victories came from the greatest risks. and as they disappeared into the depths of the fortress, Quad clung to that belief, determined to see it through to the end. Quad huddled with Gwen and the rest of their ragtag crew in a dimly lit corner of the Galactic Bank fortress. The place smelled like burned circuits and desperation, and if there was one thing Quad had learned in his time dealing with ugly situations, it was that you could always count on desperation to spice things up. Well, that was positively explosive, Nessa said over the comms, her voice crackling with static and sarcasm. So what's next on the agenda, boss? A musical number. Interpretive dance tempting, Quad replied, lips twitching into a grin that was mostly nerves and bravado. But I was thinking more along the lines of giving the Varnak a masterclass in human unpredictability. Always wanted to be a teacher, Gwen quipped, her datapad glowing like a beacon of chaotic energy in her hands. But I'm not sure this is the kind of lesson plan I had in mind. Think of it as a field trip then, Quad said, his gaze darting between the holographic map and the reality of their predicament. We've got them chasing their tails, so let's keep them guessing. We split up, make some noise, and when they're looking the other way, we make our exit. Easy, easy, Nessa repeated dryly. You say that word like it means something. But I'll bite. Where do you want me? Lower levels, Quad instructed. Start a little tech symphony down there. Give them something to dance to. Consider it done, Nessa replied, the crackle of the comms cutting off her chuckle. Quad turned to Gwen, who was already tapping away on her console. Ready to work your magic, do I have a choice? Gwen asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp as flint. I'll make their security systems think they've seen my ghost. Again, good, Quad said. And remember, if you get caught, deny everything. And if you can't deny, lie convincingly. Lying's the easy part, Gwen said with a smirk. It's the convincing that takes practice. Trust me, you've got it down, Quad assured her. All right, everyone knows their part. Let's give them a performance they won't forget. They moved with the kind of coordination that only came from shared desperation. Quad watched his team slip away into the shadows, each one a piece of the chaos puzzle he was trying to assemble. If they could keep the Varnak off balance long enough, they might just pull off the impossible, or die trying, but Quad preferred not to dwell on that particular possibility. He slipped through the fortress's twisted corridors, relying on familiarity with the place and a healthy dose of luck. The walls felt closer now, as if the very structure was conspiring to trap him. Maybe it was, he mused. Wouldn't be the first building with a grudge. His comm crackled to life, Nessa's voice cutting through the static. Lower levels are lit up like a Corvin festival. I've got alarms blaring, lights flashing, enough chaos to make a headless chicken look like a Zen master. Nice work, Quad said, peering around a corner to ensure the coast was clear. Keep them dancing, always do, Nessa replied. Quad continued forward, his sidearm a comforting weight against his hip. It wasn't much, but it was a reminder that sometimes the smallest things could make the biggest impact. A lesson he'd learned from one too many card games gone awry. Gwen's voice came through the comms next, a hint of triumph in her tone. I've got the security feeds looping. Should keep them busy for a while, trying to figure out why they're seeing double. Excellent, Quad said, nodding to himself. Now we just need to waltz right out of here. He reached the next junction, where the corridors branched out like the tentacles of a particularly unfriendly octopus. Every direction looked equally uninviting, each shadow a potential hiding spot for Varnak agents. Any sign of our scaly friends? He asked, keeping his voice low. Not yet, Nessa reported, but they're thick as thieves on the upper levels. Looks like they still think you're somewhere up there. Then let's not disappoint them, Quad said, moving towards the path that would take them to the exit. The air was thick with tension, each step echoing in the silence like a drumbeat of impending doom. But doom was relative, Quad reminded himself, usually just a matter of perspective. As long as you could keep moving, breathe the air in your lungs, you still had a chance. Gwen, how's our escape looking? He asked. About as good as a Martian trying to play poker, she replied, but I'm working on it. I found a maintenance hatch that looks promising. Just need to crack the code. Take your time, Quad said, a hint of irony in his voice. It's not like we've got Varnak breathing down our necks or anything. Hey, I'm just the code monkey here, Gwen shot back. You want it fast or you want it done right? Both, ideally, Quad said, grinning despite himself. Then let me work my magic, she replied, the sound of her fingers tapping on the datapad echoing in the comm. Quad crouched in the shadows, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. This was the moment between heartbeats, the calm before the storm, and he knew all too well that when the storm hit, it would hit hard. But they'd chosen their path and there was no turning back now. Not when they were this close to pulling off the kind of escape that legends were made of, even if those legends were more cautionary tales than anything else. Right, Gwen's voice came through, breathless and triumphant. I've got it open. Maintenance hatch is ready for a quick getaway. On my way, Quad said, already moving towards her location. A sudden noise stopped him cold, a clatter of boots, the unmistakable sound of Varnak forces on the move. They were close, too close, and Quad knew they couldn't afford a confrontation. Not now. Nessa, he whispered urgently. Change of plans. I need you to give them a reason to look somewhere else. Anywhere else? Copy that, Nessa replied, her voice carrying the weight of unspoken understanding. Seconds later, another alarm blared to life, the sound splitting the air with a shriek that set Quad's nerves on edge. But it worked, the Varnak diverted, the lure of fresh chaos too strong to resist. Quad took the opportunity, making a beeline for the hatch. He found Gwen waiting, the door open and ready for their escape. Ladies first, he asked, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Of course, Gwen said, rolling her eyes but obliging. She slipped through the hatch, Quad following close behind. They crawled through the narrow passage, the metal walls pressing in like the embrace of an overzealous ant. But the hatch led them out onto a service corridor that was mercifully empty, the path to freedom within reach. Almost there, Quad said, more to himself than anyone else. You always this optimistic? Gwen asked, her tone light with the kind of humor that came from staring down death and laughing in its face. Only when I'm about to pull off the impossible, Quad replied. Let's see if we can make it a habit. They hurried through the corridor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Quad's heart thundered in his chest, the anticipation of escape a live wire in his veins. Finally, they reached the exit, a heavy door that loomed like the gateway to salvation. Quad wasted no time, pushing it open with a grunt of effort, the hinges protesting loudly. Beyond lay the docking bay, the diplomatic shuttle sitting like a promise of salvation. Last one there buys drinks, Gwen said, taking off with a speed that belied their circumstances. Cheater, Quad called after her, his laughter mingling with the adrenaline that propelled him forward. They reached the shuttle breathless but triumphant, the promise of escape finally within their grasp. Quad practically leapt into the pilot's seat, fingers flying over the controls with the ease of long familiarity. Strap in, he said, his voice a mix of relief and exhilaration. We're getting the hell out of here. Gwen settled into the co-pilot's seat, the grin on her face matching his own. Here's to another successful misadventure. The engines roared to life, the shuttle vibrating with power as Quad guided it out of the bay and into the welcoming embrace of space. The stars stretched out before them, a reminder that despite everything, they'd managed to beat the odds one more time. Think we'll ever get used to this? Gwen asked, watching the fortress recede in the distance. Doubt it, Quad replied, his eyes on the stars. But that's half the fun. The comms crackled, Nessa's voice coming through with the sound of triumph and a bit of relief. You made it. Didn't think I'd be saying that today. Neither did I, Quad admitted, the reality of their escape settling in. But here we are. Well, don't get too comfortable, Nessa warned. The Crimson Syndicate's still out there, and they're not exactly known for their forgiving nature. Quad chuckled, a sound full of defiance and a touch of madness. Wouldn't have it any other way. As the shuttle soared into the vast expanse, Quad allowed himself a moment to savor the victory, a fleeting triumph in a universe that seemed determined to crush them. But for now, they were free, and that was enough. At least until the next crisis came knocking, which knowing their luck wouldn't be long. Here's to living another day, Gwen said, raising an imaginary glass. To living, Quad agreed, the weight of their survival balanced by the promise of more adventures to come. And with that, they disappeared into the stars, ready to face whatever madness awaited them next. Ralston Quad leaned back in the pilot's seat, basking in the short-lived glory of his latest escape. He shot a sidelong glance at Gwen, who was busy pretending to be a co-pilot. In truth, she was just fiddling with the datapad, likely trying to out-hack whatever miserable security system stood between them and a new disaster. But out of the frying pan and into the proverbial plasma storm was pretty much their modus operandi. Anything less would have felt like a holiday. Nice bit of chaos back there, Gwen said, breaking the silence. You're getting good at this, Quad, thanks, but let's not make it a habit, he replied, steering the shuttle into the black. The stars stretched around them, a reminder that while the universe was vast, it wasn't empty. There was always something out there ready to bite your ass if you got too comfortable. Hey, it's not every day you get to foil a shapeshifter heist and live to tell about it, true. Though I could do without the part where they try to kill us afterward. Details, Gwen shrugged, unfazed. So what's next? We dig into our bag of tricks and see what else we can pull out before the Varnak regroup and decide we're public enemy number one. Better make it a good one. I'm running low on surprises, she said, her fingers dancing across the datapad as if challenging it to a duel. Just then Nessa's voice crackled through the comms, cutting through the momentary peace like a knife through synth butter. All right, you thrill seekers. We've got a problem, we always do, Quad sighed. What's the flavor this time? Turns out our friends didn't take too kindly to us crashing their little party. Looks like they've got reinforcements on the way, courtesy of the Crimson Syndicate, Quad groaned. Of course they do. Because why wouldn't they want to double down on failure? Hey, no one said the universe was fair, Nessa replied with a sarcastic lilt. Anyway, I've got eyes on them heading back to the fortress. They're definitely looking to regroup and come back swinging. Guess we'd better make sure they swing at air instead, Quad said, a plan beginning to form like a dubious cloud of inspiration. Care to share with the class? Gwen asked, arching an eyebrow. Simple, we give them an encore performance. Last time they fell for a lot of lights and noise. This time maybe we add some substance to the show. An actual plan? Color me impressed, Gwen smirked, tapping furiously at her datapad. Quad chuckled, don't get too excited. It's still me we're talking about. They spent the next few minutes hatching a scheme so haphazard it could only have been conceived by desperate people with more gall than sense. If the Varnak were going to put all their eggs in the Crimson Syndicate basket, then they'd just have to rattle that basket until the eggs came scrambling out. The shuttle's systems hummed with newfound purpose as Quad steered them back toward the Galactic Bank Fortress, the place even cockroaches had aspirations of avoiding. The ship's hull shuddered, reminding them that as far as rides went, theirs was more jalopy than Starship. Ready for round 2, Quad called out, just as much to himself as to anyone else. Let's give it a shot, Gwen said, her voice tinged with the kind of excitement that only came from facing cosmic odds and deciding to spit in their eye. On your mark, Nessa chimed in through the comms. She was perched at another vantage point, the fortress security feeds dancing through her screens like an electronic ballet. I've got the systems under my thumb. Give me a window and I'll make those Varnak wish they'd opted for a day job in accounting. Quad grinned, the kind of grin that was all teeth and no promise of safety. All right, showtime. They descended on the fortress with the subtlety of a charging rhinoceros, scanners lighting up like a holiday display as they approached. Quad could almost feel the Varnak agents collectively groan as their systems blared with alarms yet again. Clumsy clatter and confusion was their new soundtrack, and by the sounds of it, it was a hit. Gwen's fingers flew over her datapad, a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos. She tapped into the fortress systems, looped the security feeds again, and sent a few choice commands to make the locks on the vault doors play a merry tune of open and shut. Hope they like surprises, she murmured, the datapad's glow reflecting in her eyes. Let's hope they like the ones we've got for them, Quad said, eyes scanning the fortress exterior as they hovered just out of reach. With a suddenness that almost made Quad believe their luck had turned, the fortress main doors swung open, revealing a horde of Varnak agents, and more notably, their syndicate allies. The group spilled out like ants from a disturbed mound, all skitter and confusion. Now, Quad shouted, slamming the shuttle into gear and diving into the fray. Nessa unleashed a new wave of mischief, tapping into the fortress supply of automated defenses. Turrets swiveled wildly, lasers painting the courtyard with streaks of light as they fired on anything and everything. It was like watching a drunk octopus try its hand at fencing. The Varnak didn't stand a chance. In their eagerness to regroup, they'd pooled all their resources into one neat, chaotic mess. A perfect target for Quad and his crew to exploit. As the first Varnak shapeshifter was caught in the crossfire, its features blurred and shifted, revealing its true form, a twisted, snarling mass of sinew and scales. The reveal sent ripples of shock through their ranks, the supposed allies suddenly suspecting each other of being something less than human. Looks like they're learning the value of trust, Galactic style, Quad quipped, guiding the shuttle in a wide arc around the courtyard. About time, Gwen replied. Now let's see if we can teach them how to retreat with dignity. The chaos on the ground reached a fever pitch. The Varnak and Crimson Syndicate agents tearing into each other with the kind of camaraderie that could only be born from mutual suspicion and imminent betrayal. It was a beautiful mess, and Quad couldn't help but admire the sheer poetry of it. Who knew all it took to unravel an intergalactic heist was a bit of human ingenuity and a lot of dumb luck, he mused. Don't forget the part where we're still alive, Gwen added, a smile tugging at her lips. Right, that too. With the fortress' own defenses tearing through its would-be attackers, Quad and his ragtag crew had the breathing room they needed to make their exit. The shuttle roared as it pulled away, leaving behind a scene of utter disarray that no amount of damage control would soon fix. Once they'd put enough distance between themselves and the fortress, Quad relaxed back into his seat, tension bleeding away like the last drops of adrenaline from a too-close brush with danger. We actually did it, he said, a touch of disbelief in his voice. Of course we did, Gwen replied, ever the optimist, or maybe just sarcastic enough to pass for one. Now we just need to keep doing it until they finally get the hint, or we run out of ways to cheat death, Quad countered, a wry smile touching his lips. Yeah, let's save that for another day. The comms crackled once more, and Nessa's voice rang through, brimming with mischief and more than a hint of satisfaction. Well, that was fun, speak for yourself, Quad shot back. I could do with a little less fun and a little more boring paperwork. Not in this galaxy, you won't, Nessa laughed. Besides, where's the adventure in that? Point taken, Quad conceded, the edge of weariness tugging at him. As they sped away from the Galactic Bank Fortress and the aftermath of their orchestrated chaos, Quad allowed himself a moment to reflect on the absurdity of it all. Humans weren't supposed to thrive on chaos, but they'd made a damn fine art of it. "Here's to the next round," he said, raising an imaginary glass in salute. "To the next round," Gwen echoed, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. And with that, they flew into the unknown, ready to face whatever madness awaited them next. Because in the end, it didn't matter how dire the odds, or how twisted the enemy's plans, Ralston Quad and his crew would always find a way to turn chaos into their greatest ally, at least until the universe came up with something they couldn't outwit. But that, as they say, was a problem for another day. Ralston Quad stared at the bruised stars blinking through the shuttle's viewport, their light barely enough to illuminate the smug satisfaction on his face. It wasn't every day you pulled off a stunt worthy of a fireworks display in a universe that loved nothing more than putting a target on your back. "You know," Gwen piped up, her eyes still glued to the datapad, "if someone told me we'd end today with a successful heist and a bunch of confused Varnak, I'd say they were more cracked than a lunar sidewalk." "Optimism's a hell of a drug," Quad replied, leaning back with a sigh that carried the weight of someone who's dodged death for the 100th time. "But hey, if the Varnak want to keep using us as their punching bag, who am I to deny them the privilege of getting sucker punched back?" Gwen chuckled, the sound echoing through the cramped shuttle like the last laugh of a dying star. "Nothing like punching up in a universe that loves to keep you down. Speaking of which, what's our status with the Galactic Authority?" Quad asked, knowing full well that the bureaucratic machine was just itching to stick its nose into their business. "All clear for now," Nessa's voice crackled through the comms. "Turns out, exposing shapeshifters doesn't exactly make you a lot of friends in the Varnak circles." "Who knew? Good thing too," Quad remarked dryly. "I was getting pretty tired of not having an entire race as enemies. Makes the galaxy feel a little too friendly." "Yeah, nothing scarier than a warm welcome," Nessa replied with a snort. "Anyway, I've got some intel. It seems our little performance did more than just disrupt their operations. The Crimson Syndicate's pulling back, licking their wounds. They're probably rethinking their internship with the Varnak." "Excellent. Let them stew in their own paranoia," Quad said, grinning at the thought of turning the tables so dramatically. "With any luck, they'll be too busy stabbing each other in the back to bother with us." Gwen put down her datapad, stretching her arms with a satisfied groan. "So, what now?" "We just sit back, relax, and wait for the next set of assholes to come knocking." "Pretty much," Quad shrugged. "But first we've got to play nice with the locals. I'd rather have a couple of allies than spend another day getting shot at." "Allies? In this galaxy?" Gwen raised an eyebrow, her skepticism more pronounced than a bad rash. "What do you think this is, a fairy tale?" "Hey, sometimes fairy tales have happy endings," Quad replied, though even he couldn't keep a straight face saying it. "Yeah, and sometimes they end with dragons eating the prince," Gwen retorted. The shuttle hummed with a newfound calm as they sped away from the fortress, the chaos they'd orchestrated now a distant pulsar. Quad let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, the tension of the past few hours finally beginning to ebb away. "Well, if we're going to play the hero, we might as well do it right," Quad said after a moment. "Let's get that artifact to someone who knows how to use it. Sure, hand it over to someone who'll either lock it away or blow up half the galaxy trying to use it," Gwen replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Quad chuckled. "Look, if they blow up the galaxy, at least we won't have to worry about our next job." "Now there's an optimistic thought," Gwen said. "You'd make a hell of a motivational speaker." The idea of speaking to a room full of hopeful individuals expecting wisdom from a man who'd likely get lost on the way to the podium was almost too funny not to laugh at. But the laughter was short-lived as the flickering light of an incoming message danced across the console, cutting through the humor like a particularly vicious paper cut. "Incoming transmission," Gwen announced, her voice tinged with the weary professionalism of someone who had long since learned to expect the worst. "Patch it through," Quad ordered, his curiosity piqued. The face that appeared on-screen was that of Admiral Tavak, her stern visage as welcoming as a black hole at a tea party. Her eyes bored into Quad with the intensity of a supernova, as if she could see right through his skin and into whatever passed for soul these days. "Ralston Quad," she began, her voice a smooth mix of authority and disdain. "I must say, your penchant for creating chaos has not gone unnoticed." Quad put on his best I'm innocent, honest face. "I prefer to think of it as problem-solving with style, Admiral." "Be that as it may," Tavak replied, unimpressed. "Your little stunt has left the Varnak in disarray and the Crimson Syndicate reconsidering their alliances. The Galactic Authority is, reluctantly impressed." "Reluctantly," Gwen mouthed, her expression a pantomime of disbelief. "Well, we aim to please," Quad said, leaning forward with a grin that was all charm and no sincerity. "What can we do for you, Admiral?" Tavek's eyes narrowed, her suspicion a tangible force. We'd like that artifact you secured. It could stabilize the region or at least keep it from collapsing into further chaos. Quad hesitated, the weight of the artifact in question heavy even in its absence. And what's in it for us? The assurance that you won't spend the rest of your days as fugitives, Tavek replied, her smile sharp enough to cut through steel, and possibly some friends in high places. Quad considered the offer, the silence stretching out like the void between galaxies. Finally, he nodded, seeing a path forward that didn't involve dodging every bounty hunter and mercenary in the quadrant. All right, Admiral, you have a deal. Gwen looked at him like he'd just suggested they take a leisurely stroll through a black hole. You're really going to trust her? No, Quad shrugged. But I trust us to handle whatever comes next. Great, Gwen sighed, rolling her eyes. Nothing like a plan that ends with a question mark. Tavek nodded, her expression one of reluctant approval. We'll arrange a meeting to transfer the artifact. And Quad, try to keep a lower profile. The universe is full of dangers and you're bright enough to attract all of them. With that, the transmission ended, the screen going dark once more, leaving only the hum of the shuttle and the stars beyond to fill the silence. I take it the universe just invited us to play nice. Nessa's voice crackled through the comms, catching the tail end of the conversation. You got it, Quad replied, a smirk playing on his lips. Time to play the game, see if we can't rig the rules in our favor. And when they come back to bite us, Gwen asked, skepticism still in full force. Then at least we'll have a hell of a story to tell, Quad replied. Great, Gwen muttered, sarcasm coloring her words. Just what I needed, more material for my memoirs. As they continued to drift through the black, the stars around them nothing more than cold, distant witnesses to their schemes, Quad couldn't help but feel a sense of strange optimism. He knew better than to trust fully in happy endings, but he'd take a few small victories where he could find them. You know, he said after a moment, breaking the comfortable silence, I think we might actually pull this off. Don't jinx it, Gwen warned, though her tone was lighter than it had been. Maybe the universe wasn't entirely out to get them after all. Jinx it, in this galaxy, Quad grinned. If anything, we just made our lives a lot more interesting. Yeah, and probably not in the good way, Gwen replied, though her smile suggested she didn't entirely mind. Nessa chimed in once more. So any plans for when we're not running for our lives or playing cosmic chess with the galaxy's finest? Retirement, Quad suggested, though even he couldn't keep a straight face at the thought. Or maybe a nice, quiet desk job somewhere far, far away. Ha, Gwen laughed outright, shaking her head. Yeah, right, like you could ever settle down. No, probably not, Quad admitted, grinning like a man with nothing to lose. But it's a nice dream. As the shuttle continued its journey through the vast, indifferent cosmos, the crew settled into a comfortable routine. They weren't heroes, not by a long shot, but they'd done something that mattered, and in the grand scheme of things, that was more than most could claim. And so, as they flew onwards, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw at them next, Quad allowed himself a single, fleeting moment of peace, knowing full well it wouldn't last. But then, nothing ever did. To the next round, he murmured, his words barely audible over the hum of the shuttle. To the next round, Gwen echoed, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead, a universe full of trouble and opportunity waiting just beyond the next horizon.